Okay, so we're back to the topic of abortion because lately I've been seeing quite a few videos on it, and it's a topic we really shouldn't forget about. The video this time is quite long, so let's try to get through as much as possible.
Because now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe, thank you very much, we are once more seeing the usual talking points from the pro-choice side, and frankly, I'm getting pretty sick of them. Because they're all crap, none of them make sense, and certainly none of them justify the termination, the ending of an innocent human life. Because you see, ultimately, the only argument that abortion activists actually have is that I don't want to have to go through pregnancy and I don't want to have to face the consequences of my actions, but they know that that doesn't sound too great.
Oh yes, of course. Start off with the straw man and misrepresentation of pro-choice arguments. Look, I can do the same. Pro-life arguments is just boiled down to, I want to establish myself as being in the moral high ground, so I'm going to interfere with your life directly so I can feel better about myself. See? Two can play at this game. There are plenty of different reasons to get an abortion, which I have discussed myself in many of my other videos, from improving the quality of life of women, reducing the number of neglected children, equalized disparities between social classes, and the fact that it's a basic medical procedure. If you missed my previous video on this topic, that last point is incredibly critical, as pregnancy is an insanely dangerous procedure, and we've seen people get permanently disabled or die because politicians who have no idea about medicine are dictating medical procedures, some of which are required to prevent injury or death of the mother. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, we're going to listen to Lauren trying her very hardest to debunk pro-choice arguments. It's times like this where I feel ashamed to be Asian, but trust me, we don't have too many stupid Asians like this one.
And the first argument or talking point that I want to debunk is the idea that without abortion, pregnancy is being forced upon women. As one Twitter user, Emily Krebs, argued, can't mandate masks, but you can mandate pregnancy, what a country. And similarly, Catherine Clark said, overturning the right to an abortion brings us to the horrifying reality of government-mandated pregnancy. We are now living in a dystopian nightmare. Forced pregnancy is morally abhorrent, and the decision will set women back decades, but we are not powerless, we will fight. Okay, so to be clear, not being able to have an abortion is not the same thing as being forced into pregnancy. And the reason why that is that philosophically, morally, and logically, not allowing or aiding someone in exiting a situation is not the same thing as putting them in that situation in the first place.
You know, I was never a fan of that argument either. I agree to some extent that not helping someone exit a situation is not the same as putting them in the situation to begin with. However, this argument isn't too far off as it is presented. It depends on how you read the situation of pregnancy. Pregnancy involves a very complex biological system that not everyone can properly comprehend. Now, I know what you're going to say. People need to understand the risks of sexual activities that it could lead to pregnancy. Well, not so fast. Ignoring the fact that pregnancy from rape happens, that would need to assume two things are true. First, that people have the proper sexual education to understand the risks, and two, that contraceptives are readily available for anyone that needs them. That's why the topic of abortions disproportionately affect people of lower class, because they generally lack the opportunity for such education and contraceptives. So from these people's perspectives, there was no choice, but rather pregnancy can happen when you least expect it. Therefore, taking away abortion is essentially the same concept as forcing people into pregnancy. Of course, the government didn't do it themselves, but it's kind of like what I say regarding God. If God can prevent evil but chooses not to, that's the same thing as creating that evil. In this case, if the government has the power to allow abortions but chooses not to, that's the same as forcing people into pregnancy. Especially if people are getting pregnant without a choice and without the proper education to understand the risks of sexual activities. Of course, you can make the argument that not knowing the risks doesn't exempt you from the consequences, and I agree to some extent. But the solution to this problem isn't to ban abortion so that people have to live with their consequences. It's to increase sexual education and access to contraceptives. That way, we can actually give people a choice, a real choice. Anyway, I could rant on more about this topic, but there's too much more to cover.
I do want to say a thank you to today's sponsor, C60 Evo.
Normally I cut out sponsored messages from the original video, but this was way too hilarious. You, Lauren, are literally being sponsored by a pseudoscience supplement alternative medication that has not proven to work and is a complete scam. Yes, because your audience is just that dumb, and you can sell them fake products and promise of better sleep and better health. Why do I know this, Lauren? Because I'm a biologist. I have a master's degree and I work in the field of science. You agreeing to a sponsorship without making sure what kind of product you are promoting is absolutely so typical of conservative anti-science pro-lifers. Yep, don't bother to check the science of anything. Whatever you feel goes. And honestly, I'm not surprised, because if you actually cared about the science of anything, you wouldn't be pro-life. I could make an entire video on C60 and the chemistry behind it. You know what? Thank you for that idea, actually. I might just do that for my next video topic next week, debunking C60 and its supposed health benefits. Lauren, you promoting something like this while making a profit from it is absolutely disgusting.
And the next thing I want to go over is the idea that outlawing abortions doesn't make them go away, it simply makes them unsafe. As AOC says, overturning Roe and outlawing abortions will never make them go away, it only makes them more dangerous, especially for the poor and marginalized. People will die because of this decision, and we will never stop until abortion rights are restored in the United States of America. So the idea that outlawing something won't make it go away entirely, therefore we just shouldn't outlaw it, kind of reasons away all laws in general, because obviously people are always going to break the law. But you would never really hear someone say, well, outlawing murder doesn't make murder go away. It just makes murder harder to commit, which obviously disproportionately affects minorities. So we should, just keep it legal. It's just not an argument. And if something is morally wrong, like abortion is, even if they will never go away entirely, they still should not be allowed to practice within the law.
I'm a huge proponent of the argument that banning abortions doesn't reduce the number of overall abortions, just the number of safe abortions. But here's the thing about comparing it to murder, which I notice is the first thing conservatives always go towards when arguing morals and laws. Try to be a bit more creative and pick something more relevant to the topic at hand next time. Each situation needs to be evaluated individually in their own situations against the costs and merits. The thing about abortion is that there is scientific backing behind the idea, where large-scale studies and meta-analyses has shown that restricting abortions will not reduce the overall number of abortions, while increasing instances of people traveling to other states to receive abortions, or just performing it dangerously using coat hangers or rat poison, which leads to permanent disabilities and even death. Now, if we had a similar study regarding murder that gave the same conclusion, then that's a different story. For example, if there was a study that showed that banning murder would lead to more people dying, people who are not directly the victims, then we would think about how that particular law works. Because at the end of the day, laws are meant to protect the people and do what's right for society. If a law is doing more harm than good, then we must reevaluate the law. That's exactly the point here with abortion. Of course, in reality, we have lots of laws that do more harm than good, but that's because politicians are always so out of touch with reality and out of touch with science. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be striving towards better laws that serve everyone better, and abortion restrictions is one of those that needs massive improvements.
And the reason why that is because human life is valuable and human life is worth protecting regardless at what stage of development it's at.
Lauren, please tell me, what is the exact biological mechanism that turns something from a non-human to human? Tell me the exact fucking biological mechanism and explain to me how that changes anything in terms of our vague definition of human beings. There is no real boundary, and science acknowledges that, which is why procedures such as abortions are evaluated based on what we know regarding the stages of fetal development. There's a reason that scientists and doctors are much more likely to be pro-choice, because we understand the biology behind what a fetus is and we make the best medical decisions for patients based on that. The more you're into science, the more you are able to see things from an objective viewpoint and understand life in regards to its biological concepts. Having that grander view is what makes us pro-choice. Pro-lifers, meanwhile, knowing absolutely nothing about how biology works and how that relates to a developing fetus, is trying so hard to force their vague definition of human life onto other people. How about you get educated a bit first before shoving your primitive ideologies down other people's throats? Or, if you want to prove me wrong, again, I challenge you to define the exact biological mechanism that turns a non-human into a human. I'll wait.
Human life is valuable in the womb, just like human life is valuable for the elderly, for the disabled. It all matters. And the fact that some people out there, regardless of the law, will still continue to disregard the value of human life doesn't mean that we should stop trying to protect it.
The difference here is that while you think you're protecting human life, you're not. You're protecting a couple of cells in the expense of actual human life.
But anyway, this kind of brings us to a semi-related argument, the idea that the pro-life side isn't actually pro-life, they're merely pro-birth. As this viral tweet by this woman named Lila Cohen explains, if it was about babies, we'd have excellent and free universal maternal care. You wouldn't be charged a cent to give birth no matter how complicated your delivery was. If it was about babies, we'd have months and months of parental leave for everyone. If it was about babies, we'd have free lactation consultants, free diapers, free formula. If it was about babies, we'd have free and excellent childcare from newborns on. If it was about babies, we'd have universal preschool and pre-K and guaranteed after-school placements. So essentially, this is the good old, oh, well, if you're against abortion, then you need to be pro-socialism and just in general support welfare from cradle to grave. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. This argument, I think more so than any other, really doesn't make sense and conflates a bunch of different issues. And if I can borrow an argument from my friend Sean over at the Actual Justice Warrior channel, but let's say there was a homeless person and you told your friend, hey, I'm gonna murder this homeless person. And your friend in response to that was like, actually, maybe you shouldn't do that. That's probably not a good idea. If he were using the same logic that the pro-choice side is using here, your friend would then say to you, well, if you don't want me to murder the homeless guy, then obviously that means you're okay with the homeless guy living with you, eating all of your food, and just, taking some of your money every month to ensure that he doesn't live on the street. Because again, if I see him on the street, I'm going to murder him.
What a god-awful analogy. Let's improve it a bit. First of all, the homeless person isn't a person, it's a pre-homeless person that doesn't yet exist. Second of all, you wouldn't be taking care of this person yourself, but rather have good government-assisted programs that would be able to get these people on their feet. Third of all, with the way things are now, if this homeless person is born into the world, you, the person who said don't kill him, absolutely wouldn't be the one taking care of him, because it would be the other person that does. So the better analogy here would be that there would be this pre-homeless person that doesn't exist, and to prevent him from existing and suffering the life that a homeless person would, we should stop him from coming into existence to begin with. But if you truly want to force your ideologies onto others and force this homeless person to be born into the world, at the very least we should have well-defined programs that help people live better lives. Not that you should personally take care of this homeless person yourself. That being said, that is most definitely not the ideal situation because we already have tons of homeless people on the streets already, and we should be focusing more on those assistance programs before introducing more homeless people into the world. Similarly for babies, when we have unwanted babies or babies born with disabilities, well, we already have a ton of them. So if you're going to force people to have more unwanted babies, instead you should focus on those who are already born into the world and are currently suffering from being unwanted or a disability, because putting more babies into that category is just absolutely inhumane. The point of this argument is that pro-lifers care so much about a couple of cells more than they care about actual babies. You can agree or disagree about the start of human life, but at the very least we all agree that babies born into the world already do most definitely qualify as human beings. And the lack of attention that pro-lifers put onto improving the lives of such children and instead bashing abortions shows that you don't actually care about human life. You care about standing on the moral high ground.
On the Prime Minister's official Twitter account, he put out a statement saying, "No government, politician, or man should tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. I want women in Canada to know that we will always stand up for your right to choose." And keep in mind that in Canada, there are actually no restrictions whatsoever on abortion, so you can pretty much terminate a pregnancy up until the point of birth, which is absolutely disgusting and a travesty, and Canadians should really be ashamed of this fact, but unfortunately, not many of them know this. But Trudeau's argument is one that often comes up when it comes to abortion, which is that women should be free to make whatever choices they want, liberty, freedom, hands off my body, etc.
Let me present a hypothetical situation here. If you had a kid, let's say he or she is 5 years old, and let's say this kid has a disease that causes both kidneys to be malfunctional, and in this hypothetical situation, let's say that you are the only perfect match, and in order to save this 5-year-old kid's life, you would have to donate one of your kidneys. Well, guess what? You're not legally required to give your kidney to this kid. The kid is dependent on your sacrifice to your body in order to live, but you are not required to give one of your kidneys. Similarly, a fetus is a parasite to the mother and is dependent on the mother's body in order to survive, and you shouldn't be legally required to sacrifice your body for the sake of the fetus. If you think otherwise, then you must also be in support of forcing people to give away one of their kidneys, or better yet, one of your lungs, since you can live perfectly fine with just one lung.
Here's the thing though, I have noticed, and you may have as well, that when it comes to people who are on the pro-choice side of things, it's very rare, but it's not impossible, mind you, but it's rare that especially the most outspoken abortion activists care about freedom when it comes to literally anything other than abortion. I mean, think about it. Do you hear these pro-abortion activists arguing for freedom and choice when it comes to things like, I don't know, the Second Amendment or the right to bear arms? Do you hear these pro-choice activists arguing for liberty when it comes to things like taxation, like school choice, like operating a business?
Conservatives who use this whataboutism argument are incredibly cringe because you're literally sitting here calling other people hypocrites when it literally goes the other way around too. Oh, you like arguing for freedom and choice with firearms? Well, why don't you argue that way or that passionately for women's rights to abortion? Oh, you like liberty when it comes to taxation or school choice? Why don't you argue liberty for the rights to abortion? You don't truly care about freedom or liberty at all. See, it literally goes both ways, so you trying to point out hypocrisy here is ultimately stabbing yourself in the foot. Now, ultimately, what matters is that each situation needs to be evaluated based on their own individual situation, costs, and merits. When we have actual scientific studies showing that restricting abortions will dangerously increase unsafe abortion numbers, leaving women permanently disabled or dead, it's pretty clear that we shouldn't criminalize this essential medical procedure. Meanwhile, for something like guns, where there's actually the opposite evidence, we have good reason to want better regulation of firearms. Of course, that's a separate video that I might make in the future. But Lauren, if you're ever confused with the science and studies we have conducted, which you most certainly are right now, I highly recommend consulting someone that has actually gone through the trouble of reading through peer-reviewed studies conducted by experts in the field, not secondary articles written by Fox News, but actual primary sources that have been validated. But anyway, the bottom line is, each law needs to be evaluated based on its own situation, and you can't just assume that arguing liberty for every case scenario is going to be the best, because it won't. Don't be simple-minded and don't group everything together like you're doing now. It's stupid.
And actually, an example of this that applies to Justin Trudeau specifically is the stark contrast in the way that the Prime Minister views the right to choose when it comes to something like abortion versus, I don't know, jab mandates. Yeah, so let's just reiterate. When it comes to abortion, this is what Justin Trudeau has to say. No government, politician, or man should tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. I want women in Canada to know that we will always stand up for your right to choose. Wow, what a strong pro-liberty stance. But let's see what Trudeau has to say about those who refuse to get the jab. About those who refuse to be vaxxed against the coof, Trudeau said they must accept the consequences of those decisions, including lost employment and restricted access to transportation and other services. He said it was their choice and nobody was ever going to force people into doing something they didn't want to do, but that there are consequences when you don't. You cannot choose to put at risk your coworkers. You cannot choose to put at risk the people sitting beside you on an airplane, Trudeau said before leaving for an international summit. So basically what I'm understanding there is that you must face the consequences of your decisions and that you do have choices, but you can't choose to put someone else at risk. And you know what's interesting about that is that it kind of sounds a lot like a pro-life argument.
No, it's not the same. First of all, by not getting vaccinated, you're putting at risk other human beings, other full-fledged human beings, especially considering that vaccinations are incredibly easy. You just make an appointment and get a jab, and very, very few people get severe side effects. It's irresponsible to yourself and other people to not get vaccinated. Therefore, it makes sense to restrict people who have not received the jab from exposing themselves to other people. Meanwhile, abortions is a decision you make for yourself with your significant other and of course your family. Also, again, you can't call pregnancy a choice due to the points I mentioned earlier regarding the lack of sexual education and the lack of access to contraceptives. If vaccines rained from the sky and you had a % chance of getting jabbed or not, then of course it wouldn't make sense to punish those people who haven't been jabbed. But everyone can get a vaccine, at least here in the first world countries, so you not getting it is an active choice. Incredibly different scenarios. Also, again, this argument you made is a double-edged sword. Even if what you said is valid, which it's not, I could say the same thing back to you. Look at you, saying people should live with their choices of pregnancy, but also being against people living with their choices of not getting a simple shot and losing access to transportation and other public services. Ridiculous.
It was your choice to get pregnant. And ladies, we've always had choices like abstinence, contraception, or even once you get pregnant.
You live as a privileged person who has had the opportunity to learn the risks of sexual activity as a kid, or to know about how contraceptives work, or to have the money to buy contraceptives. Many people don't have that luxury. You're literally like a person sitting in their house asking why homeless people can't just buy a house. The difference between you and me is that I at least acknowledge that there are people less fortunate than I am, and I want laws and policies to stop screwing these people over. Okay, so this next part, Lauren just goes on a rant about how countries in Europe aren't necessarily better than the United States despite their leaders criticizing the Supreme Court's decision. Like, whatever. Just because other countries are being hypocritical and should allow their own laws does not mean we should head in the reverse direction in terms of a woman's rights. We're skipping that.
And he also here perpetuates the lie that with abortion restrictions, women wouldn't be able to receive life-saving healthcare, which is not the case for any law that's been put on the books.
Anyone who says that has clearly not been in touch with the reality of the situation. Of course, laws are going to, on text, allow exceptions if the abortion is required to save the mother's life. However, that's not how it goes in practice for two reasons, because of how vague that definition is, and because that is written by politicians who have absolutely no knowledge in biology and medicine. You have many situations in which the law will deny abortions despite it being required to save the mother, because the fetus still has a heartbeat and politicians are not convinced that certain situations are even threatening to the mother's life. When it comes to healthcare, when it comes to doing what's right for the mother to prevent her death, it's important that doctors make those decisions. But what we've seen after the Roe v. Wade overturn is that the power is now given to politicians to make that decisions for doctors. So you see over and over again on the news where a woman dies because of eclectic pregnancies, forced to carry dead fetuses, and suffer immense pain, etc., etc. The thing is, pregnancy is an incredibly dangerous thing, and just by being on the wrong side of the coin means you will have complications. These absolutely must be dealt with by healthcare providers, not lawmakers. I made an entirely separate video on this topic where I do go into a bit more on the biology of it all, so check that out if you haven't already. Anyway, that's going to be the end of this video. Thank you to my loyal patrons, Fireshard, Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, and Edward Martin for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.